Welcome, everyone. Thank you for coming. I cannot believe this has gone by so quickly. I hope you're all having as wonderful a time as we've been having. It's really just been a great experience. So for announcements, first we have some art show winners to announce. We have a People's Choice Award that goes to first Rowan Emily North for Little Red Riding Hood, then Caitlin Zupanik for Genesis, and Kaylin Tweed for Lil Lucky the Starcatcher. We also have an exit survey that is now live that we would love to have you fill out so we can get as much feedback as possible. Next year we are hoping to be able to meet in person again, but we know we might have to consider some other options again depending on how things go. Virtual or hybrid, and we'd just love to get as much feedback as we can to kind of help with those decisions and help us in moving forward. So you can find that in the announcements channels on Discord. Also, don't miss our closing ceremony at 8 p.m. That's where we'll be saying our thanks and farewells and also introducing our new chair for the year. So to introduce Melinda, she is our wonderful theater and media guest of honor and keynote speaker this afternoon, and she's joining us from the state of New Mexico. We are so honored to have her with us and to be able to learn from her here at LTV. Melinda is an incredibly talented writer, widely known for her work on Star Trek. She and George R.R. Martin also cooked up the now 28-book Hugo-nominated Wild Cards series, a shared world anthology with a focus on the real impact of superheroes in our world. Urged on by Martin, Melinda entered the world of Hollywood in 1989, writing a spec script, Measure of a Man, for Star Trek: The Next Generation. The script was nominated for the Writers Guild Award for Outstanding Writing in a Drama Series. It has also been voted as one of the 10 best Star Trek episodes from all the series. She was on the writing staff for Reasonable Doubts and Profiler, to name only a few of the shows she's worked on. In addition, she scripted an adaptation of Star Blazers for Disney. She has written 6 pilots, one of which, Star Command, aired on the UPN network. She grew up in New Mexico, writing, shooting, swimming, and fly fishing with the support and encouragement of her father. She also studied voice at the Conservatorium der Stadtwien in Vienna, Austria. She graduated with a history degree, magna cum laude, and then earned her law degree. She practiced law for 3 years, first at Sendia National Laboratories and then at a corporate law firm. She soon discovered that even though she loved the law, she wasn't terribly fond of lawyers. At the urging of fellow author Victor Milan, she decided to try writing. She never looked back. Her latest novel, The Hidden World, book 3 in the Imperial series, was just released this December. She is also producing the Wild Cards TV movie. In addition, she was the inspiration for the Dumb Stick, a vital tool for writers on Star Trek: The Next Generation, and used for fomenting story ideation. In her spare time, she's an accomplished horsewoman, riding and showing her 2 horses, a stallion, Venta de Broga, and a buckskin Lusitano gelding, Donador, at the Grand Prix level in dressage. Please welcome Melinda Snodgrass.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Kira. And thank you, committee, for inviting me. I'm so grateful for this opportunity. And the first thing I want to assure all of you is I am not going to drone at you for 50 minutes. Okay? So be rest assured, I will give you my little talk and then we can have a conversation. And hopefully I'll be able to offer any help and advice to those of you who are interested. And because I am a novelist as well as a screenwriter, I'm going to sort of do this weaving back and forth between them. So if you'll bear with me, and I'm going to have to read because I didn't have time to memorize all of this. Here we go. The ancient Greek lyric poet Pindar wrote, "Words have a longer life than deeds," which is an interesting take on writing, especially in modern Western culture where the action hero, the superhero, the Western strong silent man with a gun, or the willing to bend the rules cop with a gun, actually anybody with a gun, is a trope that has captured the zeitgeist of our era. But Pindar was probably right. How many of us remember, great battles of the Peloponnesian War? But Pindar is remembered, and what we know about the fall of Troy has come down to us because of Homer. It was words that carried the memory. So what is behind this human drive and desire to tell stories? Probably some of it was the human need for just simple entertainment. For ancient people, the nights were long, the work was backbreaking, and as Thomas Hobbes said in his Leviathan, life was nasty, brutish, and short. The only way to fill those hours, to fend off that fear of impending death, were words, stories, poems, and songs that were carried on a human voice. But there were other reasons for what would someday become the troubadours and trouvères. But one hopes they were less charmingly annoying than the bard and witcher. Because I was a singer, I think the world would be vastly improved if people periodically just burst into song. So I'm torn between wanting way more Jasker and also wanting to see him get thumped so he'll be quiet. Uh, but I digress. The first and obvious reason we tell stories is to preserve historical memory. While we acknowledge that human beings bring their own perceptions and biases to whatever is told or written, and that history is written by the winner, these stories give a rendering of events. This is what happened, just the facts, ma'am. Stories then build on those recitation facts, as best facts can be determined by adding context. This is how things were, how that reality led to an action that changed the status quo, which has brought us to where we are now. Stories can also take the facts and context and turn them into a cautionary tale, a way to pass on lessons learned through painful experience that might save someone else from enduring that pain. Going back to our Greek, the most obvious example of this is the story of King Midas, who asked Dionysus to grant him the golden touch. Midas soon learns the downside to this gift when the food he attempts to eat turns into gold, and Midas realizes he is facing starvation. In other versions, he turns his beloved daughter into gold as well. I prefer the version where it is the transformation of his child that leads him to beg the god to remove what is now a curse and not a gift. There's much more emotional impact from that than from his inability to eat dinner. In the latter case, it just seems like he continues to be this sort of selfish, greedy man that he was in the beginning. And that brings us to another step in how we develop and then experience stories. The emotional impact. I think there is a reason the romance genre is the most popular form of fiction. It outsells everything else by a mile. The endorphins released when a person falls in love can be triggered while reading or watching a film, because the writer has given us that shadow memory of how it felt when we met that. And now we're at the heart, if you will, of the matter. Using words allows people to feel something. Love stories are the obvious ones, but there are also other stories that inspire, even when the outcome is not the expected one. Casablanca, for example, where the boy does not get the girl, or even a happy ending. I'm going to bring up Rogue One here. The inspiration is that there are causes worth dying for, and that act of sacrifice was an inspiration to a nascent rebellion. Sometimes a story can serve as an outlet for grief. Someone else has endured what I'm feeling, and I am able to process that grief along with the character and perhaps be comforted and helped by how that individual survived, found strength to go on, and came through the valley of shadow. One of the most beautiful examples of that is near the end of the musical Hamilton. The lyrics for Who Loves, Who Dies, Who Tells Your Story is all about finding purpose after loss and finding strength from the memory of your loved one. A lot of people dream of writing. There are certain steps necessary to make that happen. Foremost among them is placing butt in chair, hands on keyboard. But there is another essential component, and this one is pretty terrifying. The author must commit to being seen. And that can be a frightening thing for a writer, but it's absolutely essential. There's a long list of famous writers who have various versions of this quote, but I'm going to go with Hemingway, who is reported to have said, "It's easy to write. Just sit in front of your typewriter and bleed." Comic book writer Mike Wade added an addition to that bleeding on the keyboard thing with the admonishment in all caps, "Make me feel." And that really is the key. You have to allow to make your characters feel deeply. And for that to happen, you have to breathe life into them by sharing with those characters and all the shadowy readers and viewers out there in book and movie and TV land a part of yourself. And God, it can hurt. It is reported that when Alexander Dumas killed Porthos in The Man in the Iron Mask, he laid down his pen and wept, then walked the streets of Paris crying, "I killed Porthos." I'm no Dumas, but I confess I have teared up when I put some characters through a particular painful event or knew that they had to die. As my late friend Victor Milan once said regarding our characters and our treatment of them, God, I hope they never form a union. Those of us who work in film have it easier because we have actors to personify those emotions, a director, the use of a camera, sound and music, and set design to help set the mood and sell the moment. Not everything is riding on the words, just 90%. Because if our words aren't true and evocative, we get that actor, director, and composer or DP nothing to work with. There is a reason why oftentimes a novelist has difficulty making the transition to writing screen. When writing novels, we have all of the words to describe the scene, the characters' inner turmoil, the dialogue exchanges between the characters. We do have some advantages over the screenwriter in that we can use internal dialogue, which, by the way, I hate and am terrible at. But we also have all five senses at our disposal. In film, we are limited to only two, sight and sound. However, for the screenwriter, we soon, excuse me, we soon learn that silence really can be golden. I have a boss who once said to me, "Words are the enemy." I think that's going a little too far, but he was speaking to a fundamental truth. The best moment I have is when I know an actor can save me writing a page of dialogue because I can rely on them to play that moment with just a look. A great example of this is in Casablanca, in the scene between Rick and the young Bulgarian bride, as she talks in code about what she's about to do in order to get the exit visas from the charmingly corrupt Captain Renault. Watch Bogart's face. You see him suddenly begin to understand why Ilsa left him in. There's another example, and I'm a little bit hesitant to mention it because one of the actors in question has turned out to be a very problematic individual. But it is worth watching to see a great actor do something without words. It's the Rollo Tomassi scene in LA. This requirement to be seen is why it never ever works out well for the author to chase the market. Just because romance or urban fantasy or space opera is selling well, you should never ever make the decision to write it or to write in one of those genres if you don't love them, if you are doing it just for the money. If you try, you will come across as inauthentic, and readers will pick up on that in a heartbeat. Write what you love. Write about something for which you are passionate. If you've got to bleed, you may as well be bleeding for a story you actually. So let's get a little bit into the nuts and bolts of writing. Miriam Quick, in an article for the BBC, wrote about a 1995 lecture in which Kurt Vonnegut, and I'm going to start quoting from the article now, chalked out various story arcs on a blackboard, plotting how a protagonist's fortunes change over the course of the narrative on an axis going from good to ill. The arcs include Man in a Hole, in which the main character goes from trouble, then gets out again. Vonnegut says, people love that story. They never get sick of it. And Boy Gets Girl, in which the protagonist finds something wonderful, loses it, then gets it back again at the end. Vonnegut concluded his lecture saying, there is no reason why the simple shape of story can't be fed into computers. They are beautiful things. And lo, that has now been done. Using tech mining, Professor Matthew Jockers at Washington State University, and later researchers at the University of Vermont's Computational Story Lab analyzed data from thousands of novels to reveal 6 basic stories. You could call them archetypes that form the building blocks for more complex stories. The Vermont researchers described the 6 story shapes behind more than 1,700 English novels as rags to riches, a steady rise from bad to good fortune, riches to rags, a fall from good to bad, a tragedy, Icarus, a rise and then a fall in fortune, Oedipus, a fall, then a rise and a fall again, Cinderella, rise, fall, rise, Man in a Hole, fall, rise. Going back to me as opposed to the really interesting article, these are obviously simple platforms upon which a writer crafts a more complex narrative. For example, in tragedy, they overlook the fact that it isn't just that bad things happen to a character. They happen because of a fatal flaw in the character of the protagonist, which makes it more interesting and more valuable as a lesson of behavior. However, these archetypes are foundational. And more importantly, they set expectations. And expectations are really important to readers and to viewers. Over the years, formula has gotten a bad rap. But formula is not a dirty word. It's not a bad thing. Formula creates excitement and expectation in the audience. And believe me, you do not want to disappoint them. When I sit down to write, I am making an explicit promise to my reader that I will give them and that I will not disappoint them. Now, that isn't a promise that I will give them a happy ending. Though Connie Willis and I agree, there is absolutely nothing wrong with a happy ending. What I am promising is that I will give them an earned ending. This is my reminder that if your story is based on one of these archetypes, you best not overcomplicate the story so much that you fail to meet those expectations by trying to be too clever by half, or trying to redefine science fiction or television or whatever other grandiose notion one. Which brings me to what I feel is the most essential rule. Endings matter. In other words, you have to stick the landing. This is a debate I've been having with a certain famous fantasy author over many years. He claims if you have a great journey, you will be forgiven for punting the ending. I couldn't disagree more. If you blow the ending, it doesn't matter how great the journey might have been. Bad ending will taint the taste of the entire work, whether a book or a film. I have my own personal experience with this. I have a confession to make. I play video games. I love them. And in this particular video game, Mass Effect, it should have gone down as one of the greatest, if not the greatest, video game in the history of the internet. But they blew the end. I loved the game, and the ride was amazing. But I cannot bring myself to replay it because I know that dreadful ending is out there waiting for me. And believe me, if I love a game, I will replay it numerous times, such as Dragon Age Origins. It's because of the importance of ending that I won't start a novel or a screenplay until I know how it ends. I do Hollywood style outlining or breaking a story on my novels as well as my screenplay. So I plot backwards from that ending that I already. But before I start actually laying out the important scenes in each act and figuring out the teaser, that's the hook that's going to get the reader or a viewer to take the ride with me, I sit down and I ask myself, what is this story actually about? What is the theme? I have a shorthand for that depending upon the audience, I phrase in slightly different ways. This is the cleaned up version. Plot is the stuff that happened. Theme is why it matters. What is this story going to say about the human condition? Can it elucidate, or at least attempt to elucidate, the secrets of the human heart? Can it offer people a place to explore difficult topics? When I teach, I use the first Thor movie as my example of theme. When I ask students to tell me what the movie is about, it runs the gamut from people telling me it's about a big robot shooting fire out of its face, which is very lame, to be about Thor becoming king, which is a very surface view of it. The next level is Thor learning humility and the value of self-sacrifice, which is a better analysis. But then I point out that this is really a story about fathers and sons, and about how an abusive father ends up destroying both his son and by extension his family by pitting them against each other. Everything in this movie is about trying to earn the love of a distant father figure, particularly on the part of Loki. How toxic, how tragic is it that he lures his actual father into a trap so he can kill him to try to earn the love and respect of Odin. And that's always been the strength of our beloved genre. Science fiction and fantasy allows an author to bring up issues of racism, imperialism, fascism, misogyny, bigotry in all of its forms, domestic abuse, sexual violence, but at arm's length and in a relatively safe space. It's easier to examine the mote in our own eye, or the beam, if you will, if we are seeing it through the lens of aliens on a distant planet, or elves in a fantasy. Perhaps by reading that story, a person can begin to question their own biases and for myself, I write because I can't not write. Stories and characters sort of jostle about in my head like rudderless boats, all looking to me to take the tiller and send us on a. Deciding to write is in some way also an act of sublime arrogance, thinking my words and thoughts are important enough to be shared. but it's an arrogance outweighed by fear. Each time I approach a new project, that first blank page, I'm shaken by doubt. Who am I to think my words have relevance, that they should be read by thousands or heard by millions? There's a lot of responsibility riding on decision. As Abraham Cowley wrote in The Prophet, that provided the title for this talk, Words That Weep and Tears That Speak, words can comfort a grieving heart, inspire us to get into good trouble, instruct the next generation, speak tenderly to those we love. They can also brutalize and incite, degrade, and demean. Words have power. So let us choose our words wisely and let's make them good ones. Thank you. So I'm going to rely on you guys to sort of let us carry this discussion forward and see if I can answer any questions you have.
Excellent, thank you. Reminder that if you have questions, you can post those in the Discord channel and we will ask them here. All right, first question. If you could tell your younger self, your younger writing self, that is, anything, what would it be?
What would it be? God, I have so many mistakes I made. I have to sort of think about it. It would probably be to spend more time figuring out how to dress a scene, if you will. I have to be honest, I hate description. And I was really, really bad at it when I started, to the point that, you know, one of my friends, Walter John Williams, who's a very fine writer, would say to me in writers group, in our crit group, as usual, great dialogue, Melinda. Are they in a white room? So I've tried really hard to get better about evoking all the senses, particularly in novels. I mean, obviously it's easier in a screenplay because I know I've got this huge staff that's going to back me up and they're going to dress the set, and they're going to put costumes on the actors and all those other things. But for me, actually what helped me, ooh, and I almost shouldn't say this, was actually starting to write a little bit in first person because you tend to describe things more. Now, my other cautionary thing is if you are a young writer just starting out, do not try first person. Everybody thinks it's easier. It's not. It is enormously difficult. If you want to see how it's done well, go read Roger Zelazny. He was the master of first person. But it's actually very tough. So I would say don't start there. But you know, I literally walk around now and like I'll feel what a paper towel, I'll rub it on my hands and say, okay, how does that sound? How did that feel? How can I describe that? Because I know I'm bad at it and I'm trying really hard to address that. So that would be someplace that I would really work on and uh, and get into things more quickly. Um, I used to always end up writing several chapters that weren't actually the beginning of the book, and then having to throw them away because then I realized that the story was actually starting over here on chapter 3. So that's another helpful thing is figure out where your story actually starts, and that's again why I do the Hollywood style plot break, which I learned to do after I became a novelist. So you know that's I use the plot break because I can see, oh dear, that is really boring stuff that may be interesting to me, but isn't actually going to jumpstart the story.
Great. Okay, what was your favorite experience as a writer for Star Trek The Next Generation?
um, honestly, it was being in the writers with these other great writers, with Ricky and Hans and Ira and Ron, and Richard, and you know various folks who came through. I love being in a writer's room. I mean, that's where the dumb stick came from. Uh, I had been given this as a gift by a friend, a sort of celebration of my getting hired to work on this TV show. And one day we were all together breaking a story. I don't remember which one it was. And I was playing with it, messing with it as we all sat in one office. And all of a sudden, Richard called out, he said, "Give me that dumb stick." And so he took it and he held it up and he said, "I'm going to say something really stupid now. I mean, this is a crazy idea, guys, but just let me go with it." And he said this thing, and we all went, "Yeah, wow, that's really stupid." But if we tweaked it a little bit, it would really give us something very interesting. And so this became the dumb stick. And when you were holding, you had permission to just throw out any sort of crazy idea. And meanwhile, we had this huge whiteboard, and these ideas were going up on it in the acts and scenes and so forth. And then I brought it back to the novel writing group, the writers group I belong to in New Mexico. And George and I use it a lot in wild cards. I mean, even though we can't be together physically right now because of COVID, if we're on the phone with each other and discussing an upcoming wild cards book, he'll say, "Okay, I'm metaphorically holding the dumb stick now," and I'll do the same. And a lot of our writers have picked up on it. So I know people would love for me to say, and yes, the first moment I heard actors speak my dialogue on a soundstage for Measure of a Man, um, that was a moment it still evokes that emotion in me that I can't believe it's happening. I mean, I was really happy the first time I saw my book on a bookshelf in a bookstore, but it was nothing compared to hearing Patrick Stewart and Brent Spiner and um, all the rest of the fabulous cast um, speaking words that I had written for them. So those are my one is a sort of gestalt of being in a writer's room, and the other is that moment when the very first time I got to hear actors speak my.
Wonderful. Okay. Can you describe an ending that you would work from sounds? For example, Star Wars is the ending you would start from be the rebels destroy an ultimate weapon used by an evil empire.
Yes. I actually, when I'm teaching, I usually use Star Wars because everybody has seen it, or most people have seen it. And so it's very easy to lay out for the most part and go, the ending, rebels blow up big mucking Death Star. That scene that follows where everybody but the Wookiee gets a medal is what Daniel Abraham calls falling action. It's sort of the little wrap up, the little coda, the tying the bow at the end of the thing, but the ending is blow up the Death Star. And then from there, I go to the teaser. I go from the ending to what is the teaser. And the teaser is little spaceship going through space, looks like it's being shot at. Suddenly, this enormous spaceship comes over your head, and you're just going, "Oh my God, this is fabulous." You're going to watch that no matter what. You're like, "Okay, who's shooting at them? Why are they shooting at them? What happened? Who are these people?" You want to know. And I should have actually sat down and done all this ahead of time. Sorry, I'm also trying to write. But you can then go through, and then the next thing you do is you figure out the ending of each act. In television right now, almost every TV series, if it's a 1 hour, and I'm a 1 hour drama writer, I don't know how to do a 30-minute thing. But in that, right now, it tends to be a teaser and 5 acts. That was how it was on Star Trek. I actually preferred what we had on Reasonable Doubts, which was a teaser and 4 acts, because you don't have to keep coming up with some sort of exciting act out that keeps people not changing the channel. But now it does seem like everything is a teaser and 5. And so when you lay it out on your board with either cards on a cork board or your whiteboard with multicolored pins, I'll get into the multicolored pins in a moment. After you have the ending, the climax, you have your teaser, then you go in and you start laying out what is the end of, because once you know that, you know what scenes you need to get you to those ends, and it's incredibly useful. So I'm going to jump on any of you who, you'll have to hold off on questions, but I'm going to talk about this. What I've always outlined, I think it was being a lawyer before I turned to writing. I tend to be very methodical, and I was always an outliner, even when I first started writing. But Hollywood really taught me how to break a. And you can do this for your novels as well as your screenplay. But one of the things that I learned early on in Star Trek writing room was you assign a different color to each character. And the reason you do that is you can see if you lose track of the character. It's a very visual reminder that they've dropped out of the story. We had that happen on an episode where suddenly we looked up and Troy, who was normally blue, suddenly Troy was gone after the second act. We were like, oh, we better find something for Marina to do. So we had to go back. Now, in a novel, and even in an original screenplay, sometimes when you lose track of that character, it may mean you don't need that character, or it's the wrong character, that there's somebody else. We had that happen. Daniel Abraham, we were all doing a plot break on a big fantasy series he was doing. And he had this idea, this character was going to be important, and we could not keep the guy in there. But we kept circling back and talking about this widow. And finally, I said, maybe he doesn't belong in the story. Maybe the widow is the other view. And that was the case. And so if you read his, called The Dagger and the Coin, you're going to see that ultimately this older woman becomes a hugely important character, and that happened in a plot. So that's why we do the colored pins, and it's very shut up.
Thank you. Next question. What
Anything
have
else?
what have you learned from watching younger writers develop? Can you tell
Hello?
who's really good at the outset? What are the most
Have I
valuable
lost you?
gifts? Oh, sorry.
Oh, there we go. I was like, oh no, technical difficulty.
Sorry about that. Okay, next question. What have you learned from watching younger writers develop? Can you tell who's really good at the outset? What are the most valuable gifts, and who sees the most improvement, and so on?
Okay. I think the thing that I look, um, I was a musician, I was a singer, and writing for me, I mean, anybody can learn the rules. This is grammar, this is punctuation, this is how this works. But for me, writing is similar to music in that it rhythm, it flows. Um, so I look for someone who has that facility, that I can see that native ability to find the music in it, the grace in it. I also look for someone who is, and this doesn't mean purple prose, don't mistake this, but someone who is throwing their heart into this, who is giving me deep connection to the characters they're creating, that they feel real to me. And you can see, even if you just see flashes of it, that person is someone that's going to undoubtedly. And the other thing about writing is, practice. It's like, how do you get to Carnegie Hall? It's the same thing. I mean, nothing you write is wasted. Even if that novel or that never gets published or that screenplay never gets made, and believe me, in Hollywood, you write a lot of screenplays that never get made. The very act of writing makes you better. So the more you do it, the better you're going to get. The other thing is, writers groups, if they are good writers, are very valuable to have another set of, or if you don't have access to that, find yourself some good beta readers, people you trust, people who aren't just going to, tell you it's wonderful because they're your mom, but you want somebody who's going to read with a critical eye, give you feedback. But you want to make sure, I mean, there's always the horror stories of toxic writers groups where they just beat on each other, and that is not helpful. I mean, the point of that is to help you make it better. So you want to find a group, generally a group where the writers are a little bit better than you are. I mean, you don't want to, like jump into the major leagues because that will just depress you and defeat you. I mean, our writers group had George R. R. Martin, Daniel Abraham, Walter John Williams. Um, it was kind of heavy duty. So if you're a beginning writer, you probably don't want to be in that writer, but you want to find one that's a little bit better than you are, people who are a little farther along, so that they challenge you and you can see what they're doing and you go, ooh, how did they do that? And I did that all the time. I mean, Daniel is one of the most beautiful writers. His prose is so exquisite. Walter could write just amazing, pricky, wonderful little intricate plots, fight sequences. And as I read them, I analyzed how they did that and hopefully, learned how to be better myself. So those are all very, very helpful. And, just, and there are also our online, because of COVID, I know it's very hard to be in a writer's group right now, but I know a number of people who did well with the online writers, the OWW, that had been quite helpful to a number of aspiring writers, a place to get feedback and to hone your, and obviously read. I mean, read people and see what they did and see what they can teach you.
Wonderful. Next question. How do you keep writing when you feel that the person you are, your voice, and your stories isn't trending right now?
Um, it comes back to that I can't not write. I'm always wanting to write, and even after I've done my real work, I commit fan fiction occasionally because I love it. I love a particular franchise, and so after I do my actual work, I will go back and and write a little fan fiction in the evening sometimes. Like I wrote a Mass Effect fan fiction because I was so angry about the ending. Um, you can't think about it. You just have to think, I love this story. I love these characters. And you may end up, that book may not sell right away, or it may sell 3 years from now. And in Hollywood, it really is the case that it might be that you'll write a screenplay and it won't come to fruition for 10 or 12 years. I mean, the man who won the Academy Award for The King's Speech had written that script years and years and years ago, before it was. So, I think you just write it and then go on to the next thing. I mean, don't get frozen and don't look back. And the other thing is, I treat this like a job. I don't wait until I feel like writing. There, because some days you're going to be writing what Walter calls the Kansas Nebraska stories. Or the chapters that you kind of just have to get through to the next exciting tentpole scene in a script or a book. But you go in, you do the work, and that's the value of outlining. This is why I mean, I'm just, I am not a proponent of pantsing or being, as George calls it, a gardener, because I have everything outlined. So when I go into my office in the morning, I can look at the outline, look at the scene, and say, okay, today I'm writing this scene or these two scenes. Um, and don't set yourself, I mean, unreasonable. One of the things a friend of mine, another screenwriter, Michael Cassett, who's also a very fine novelist, said, we've only got about 5.5 hours of, sort of effective brain power to do this. And so, going in and using it, and then go do something physical. Go take a hike, go to the gym, go do an elaborate, cook something, do something that gets you away from, because I think there's a tendency to think if I don't write 20 pages, I'm a failure. My goal is to write 1,000 words if it's a novel, which is 4 pages. If I happen to do one or two more, yay. And for a screenplay, it's 7 pages in a day's work. I can sometimes do more if I do one project in the morning, go and ride the horses, go take a hike, go to the gym, come back in the afternoon, pick up a different project. Sometimes I'll do novel screenplays, play novel. so that it's a different thing. But you know, right? Don't worry about the market. You can create a market. I mean, the Daniel and Ty, who wrote The Expanse, when they wrote the first Expanse book, um, space opera was dead, 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 dead. I mean, no publisher wanted a space opera. They were like, nah, we don't have space opera. They sold that book. They revitalized space opera, and they have a TV show. So you cannot outguess.
Thank you. Next question. Who are some writers you enjoy reading and or have influenced your own writing style?
Um, um, John Le Carre, the great spy master, writer of the Smiley books. I think he was one of the great writers of the 20th century. I think he was phenomenal. So definitely him. Um, I also I find Connie Willis, just her ability to write comedy, which I'm not good at, and it's very hard to do, and she's brilliant at it. But she has this ease of creating people and characters who are so relevant, so real. So I find Connie to be hugely um, Daniel Abraham, because just the beauty of his prose. Um, gosh, so many. I mean, I love Tolkien, but he's not really, an influence on me because he wrote it in almost Victorian style with a sort of omniscient, watching thing. And we tend to do much more close third now is much more the style, and I prefer it. But I still, certainly for his ability to evoke place, which I know I'm bad at. So um, to go back and read about his description of the mines of Moria or Lothlorien, okay, that he did that. Um, oh, I suppose I could run and look at my bookshelf and say these people. Um, uh, I've got too many things jostling my head. I'll leave it with that for now. You guys can, email me through my website or find me on Facebook, and we can continue chatting about it. So.
Excellent. One final question. Has act structure changed for the binging audience?
Oh, yes. Oh my God, yes. Um, um, it's actually a killer. You really have to rethink how you lay out your season. Um, I binged Battlestar Galactica. It did not binge well, not at all, because it was not designed for that style of viewing. Um, and now we're all having to look at it in a different. And in a weird way, the place we have to kind of look to see how to work is soap operas. Um, how did they keep that running 5 days a week, 30 minutes a day, um, so that people kept on watching? It's not easy. It's hard, and it's constantly on my mind. I mean, I noticed that Disney and a lot of the streaming services, I've gone back to drop an episode every week. Lorian, WandaVision, all of these things, because somebody may wait and save them all up, but I think they have found that the anticipation and the excitement that garner is something that's really valuable for an. I'm waiting for the next installment feeling. Um, and so people have tended to go back to it rather than dropping the season in one big. I hope that helps.
Yes, that was a wonderful answer.